Good Wednesday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for July the 5th. We are reading today. I did a little bit of an adjustment. We're going to read chapters 11 and 12 together today so we can keep the Jephthah text together in one unit, and then we'll start reading about Samson tomorrow in chapter 13. But I appreciate so much you tuning in for our reading today. Hope that you enjoyed a wonderful 4th of July holiday involving lots of time spent with friends. Hopefully some good grilled food and maybe some fireworks as well. Got a little iffy there with the rain. Hope that it would have pushed out, and thankfully seems to have gone pretty smoothly. But thank you so much again for taking time to read along with me today. Let me get the text up on the screen for us, and we'll read along together here in Judges chapter 11 and 12. We are introduced into this Jephthah saga at the end of chapter 10, where we're introduced to the Ammonites assembling and camping at Mizpah, and they did so against Gilead. And the rulers of Gilead, they look to one another and they say, well, who's going to lead us? Who's going to be the deliverer for us against the Ammonites? That shifts to chapter 11 then, and we're introduced to Jephthah, who, beginning in chapter 11, verse number 1, we'll begin reading here, that Jephthah the Gileadite was a valiant warrior, but he was the son of a prostitute, and Gilead was his father. Gilead's wife bore him sons, and when they grew up, they drove Jephthah out and said to him, you will have no inheritance in our father's family, because you are the son of another woman. So Jephthah fled from his brothers and lived in the land of Tob. Then some worthless men joined Jephthah and went on raids with him. Sometime later, the Ammonites fought against Israel. And when the Ammonites made war with Israel, the elders of Gilead went to Jephthah from the land of Tob, or went to get Jephthah from the land of Tob. They said to him, come, be our commander, and let's fight the Ammonites. Jephthah replied to the elders of Gilead, didn't you hate me and drive me out of my father's family? Why then have you come to me now when you're in trouble? They answered Jephthah, that's true. But now we turn to you. Come with us, fight the Ammonites, and you will become leader of all the inhabitants of Gilead. So Jephthah said to them, if you are bringing me back to fight the Ammonites, and Yahweh gives them to me, I will be your leader. The elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, Yahweh is our witness if we don't do as you say. So Jephthah went with the elders of Gilead. The people made him their leader and commander, and Jephthah repeated all the terms in the presence of the Lord of Yahweh at Mizpah. Verse number 12, Jephthah sent messengers to the king of the Ammonites, asking, what do you have against me that you have come to fight me in my land? The king of the Ammonites said to Jephthah's messengers, when Israel came from Egypt, they seized my land from the Arnon to the Jabbok and Jordan. Now restore it peacefully. Jephthah again sent messengers to the king of the Ammonites to tell him, this is what Jephthah says. Israel did not take away the land of Moab or the land of the Ammonites. But when they came from Egypt, Israel traveled through the wilderness to the Red Sea and came to Kadesh. Israel sent messengers to the king of Edom, saying, please let us travel through your land. But the king of Edom would not listen. They also sent messengers to the king of Moab, but he refused. So Israel stayed at Kadesh. Then they traveled through the wilderness and around the lands of Edom and Moab, and came to the east side of the land of Moab, and camped on the other side of the Arnon, but did not enter the territory of Moab. But for the Arnon was the boundary of Moab. Then Israel sent messengers to King Sihon, king of the Amorites, king of Heshbon. Israel said to him, please let us travel through your land to our country. But Sihon would not trust Israel to pass through his country. Instead, Sihon gathered all his troops and camped at Jahaz and fought with Israel. Then Yahweh God of Israel handed over Sihon and all his troops to Israel, and they defeated them. So Israel took possession of the entire land of the Amorites who lived in that country. They took possession of all the territory of the Amorites, from the Arnon to the Jabbok, and from the wilderness to the Jordan. Yahweh God of Israel has now driven out the Amorites before his people Israel, and will you now force us out? Isn't it true that you can have whatever your God Chemosh conquers for you, and we can have whatever Yahweh our God conquers for us? Now, are you any better than Balak, son of Zippor, king of Moab? Did he ever contend with Israel or fight against them? while Israel lived 300 years in Heshbon and Aroer and their surrounding villages, and in all the cities that are on the banks of the Arnon. Why didn't you take them back at that time? I have not sinned against you, but you are doing me wrong by fighting against me. Let Yahweh, who is the judge, decide today between the Israelites and the Ammonites. But the king of the Ammonites would not listen to Jephthah's message that he sent him. The spirit of Yahweh came on Jephthah, who traveled from Gilead and Manasseh and then through Mizpah of Gilead. He crossed over to the Ammonites from Mizpah of Gilead. Jephthah made this vow to Yahweh: if you in fact hand over the Ammonites to me, whoever comes out of the doors of my house to greet me when I return safely from the Ammonites will belong to Yahweh, and I will offer that person as a burnt offering. Jephthah crossed over to the Ammonites to fight against them, and Yahweh handed them over to him. He defeated 20 of their cities with a great slaughter, from Aroer all the way to the entrance of Menith and to Abel Karamim. So the Ammonites were subdued before the Israelites. When Jephthah went to his home in Mizpah, there was his daughter coming out to meet him with tambourines and dancing. She was his only child. He had no other son or daughter besides her. When he saw her, he tore his clothes and said, "No, not my daughter. You have devastated me. You have brought great misery on me. I have given my word to Yahweh and cannot take it back." Then she said to him, "My father, you have given your word to Yahweh. Do to me as you have said, for Yahweh brought vengeance on your enemies, the Ammonites." She also said to her father, "Let me do this one thing. Let me wander 2 months through the mountains with my friends and mourn my virginity." "Go," he said. And he sent her away 2 months. So she left with her friends and mourned her virginity as she wandered through the mountains. At the end of 2 months, she returned to her father, and he kept the vow he had made about her. And she had never been intimate with a man. Now it became a custom in Israel that 4 days each year, the young women of Israel would commemorate the daughter of Jephthah, the Gileadites. Chapter 12, the men of Ephraim were called together and crossed the Jordan to Zavon. They said to Jephthah, "Why did you cross over, or why have you crossed over to fight against the Ammonites, but didn't call us to go with you? We will burn your house with you in it." Then Jephthah said to them, "My people and I had bitter conflict with the Ammonites, so I called for you, but you didn't deliver me from their power. When I saw that you weren't going to deliver me, I took my life in my own hands and crossed over to the Ammonites, and Yahweh handed them over to me. Why then have you come today to fight against me?" Then Jephthah gathered all the men of Gilead. They fought and defeated Ephraim, because Ephraim had said, "You Gileadites are Ephraimite fugitives in the territories of Ephraim and Manasseh." The Gileadites captured the fords of the Jordan leading to Ephraim. Whenever a fugitive from Ephraim said, "Let me cross over," the Gileadites asked him, "Are you an Ephraimite?" If he said no, they told him, "Please say Shibboleth." If he said Sibboleth, because he could not pronounce it correctly, they seized him and executed him at the fords of the Jordan. At that time, 42,000 from Ephraim died. Jephthah judged Israel 6 years. When he died, he was buried in one of the cities of Gilead. Ibzan, who was from Bethlehem, judged Israel after Jephthah and had 30 sons. He gave his 30 daughters in marriage to men outside the tribe and brought back 30 wives for his sons from outside the tribe. Ibzan judged Israel 7 years. When he died, he was buried in Bethlehem. Elon, who was from Zebulun, judged Israel after Ibzan. He judged Israel 10 years. And when he died, he was buried in Aijalon in the land of Zebulun. After Elon, Abdon, son of Hillel, who was from Pirathon, judged Israel. He had 40 sons and 30 grandsons who rode on 70 donkeys. Abdon judged Israel 8 years, and when he died, he was buried in Pirathon in the land of Ephraim, in the hill country of the Amalekites. And that is Judges 11 and 12, covering the text concerning Jephthah, and then these 3 very minor judges, Ibzan, Elon, and Abdon. All right, so what do we learn from specifically really focusing on the story of Jephthah? This is taking place on the eastern side of the Jordan, in the land that is disconnected from the rest by the Jordan River. And what we come to find out, again, going back to end chapter 10, is that the people of Gilead, they need a deliverer. They need a savior. They need someone to come to rescue them from the hands and the oppression of the Ammonites. Who's going to do this? Well, then you kind of cut to a different scene where we're introduced to Jephthah, and we're told about Jephthah that he had many siblings, it seems, but his mother was different from their mother. His mom, in fact, was a prostitute, more than likely a Canaanite prostitute. So we're introduced right away that this family structure is really bad. And normally, whenever you have bad family structures, the rest of the story kind of follows suit. Well, they run him away, and they say that you're not allowed to be here. You should not get any of the inheritance. You should not be a part of this family because your mom was a prostitute. You're a vile person just for that. So therefore, they run him off. Well, then later on, after he runs off, he joins together with what are termed worthless men, and they basically form a militia of sorts. They form a militia. They were renegades. They're basically a warring gang, and they seems to be are very successful at this. So much so that after the Ammonites come and make problems for Gilead, the leaders of Gilead reach out to Jephthah, call him back, say, "Hey, will you come deliver us?" So at this point, they're saying, "Come be our commander, fight for us against the Ammonites." Well, Jephthah, one thing we're going to learn about him, he's very sly. He's very shrewd in his dealings. He's a negotiator. We'll see that all throughout his story. Well, at first, they're offering him to be a military leader. He says, "Hold on, didn't you drive me away? Now you want me to come save you?" No, if I'm going to come back to you, I want to be the leader, not just a military leader, but the leader. I want to be the one who's in total control of Gilead. You're going to give me a very esteemed position within the people. Well, at that point, they're thinking, okay, well, I guess we got to do that. So, I mean, we're either going to be delivered by him or we're not. So sure, you can do that. Verse 10, the elders say to Jephthah, "Yahweh is our witness if we don't do as you say." So they agree to it. He comes, and it says that he repeated all of his terms in the presence of Yahweh at Mizpah. Well, Mizpah is an unauthorized location to commune with God. So we already see a lack of understanding from Jephthah as to the way Yahweh was to be interacted with. And that's just the first of many times which we're going to see he just does not understand Yahweh whatsoever. He is not in any way, shape, or form a godly man or a spiritually minded man. In fact, he shows himself very much to be a pagan in the way that he carries himself and behaves. He knows that Yahweh is the God of Israel, but he's going to show that Yahweh is just one of the gods among many. Verse 12, he sends off a messenger to the Ammonite king, and basically he says, "Hey, why are you causing trouble in my land?" Which is not his land. Again, it's God's land, but he doesn't understand that. The messenger comes back and says, "Hey, we want our land back. You took it from us." At this point, Jephthah goes through in verses 14 through 26 and really just reframes history in a way that makes things look better for him. Either he's reframing history or he just doesn't understand the history of what took place at all. At this point, I mean, and there's a number of texts that tie into this. Numbers 22 through 24 comes into play here. Deuteronomy 32 comes into play here, specifically regarding Deuteronomy 32. In verses 23 and 24, he says, "Yahweh, God of Israel, has now driven out the Amorites before his people Israel, and will you now force us out? Isn't it true that you can have whatever your God Chemosh conquers for you, and we can have whatever Yahweh God conquers for us?" Really? Is that how Jephthah is thinking? That we each have our gods, and we'll just take whatever our gods give us? Again, he's seeing Chemosh and Yahweh as being equal gods. And not even that was funny previously is going back to let's see here. I think I wrote this down somewhere. Oh yeah, right here at 24. That's not even their God. He's getting their gods all mixed up. That's not the God that they serve. So again, it just shows that Jephthah is just totally he's clueless about a number of things. All he is, he's a militia man. He's just a fighter. He's a soldier. He's a warlord. He's not concerned whatsoever with truly things that pertain to Yahweh or that pertain to the will of Yahweh. He's just looking to gain a victory. He's just looking to defend whatever he wants to defend and go on about his way. So in thinking about this, Jephthah he's just continuing to negotiate and he's continuing to try to work things out to his best advantage. And again, whether God's going to help him or not, I mean, he just basically treats God as if God is a human judge. Verse 27, let Yahweh, who is the judge, decide today between the Israelites and the Ammonites. But the king of the Ammonites will not listen to Jephthah's message that he sent him. So Jephthah thinks that he can negotiate, since he hasn't been able to negotiate with the Ammonite king. Maybe he can negotiate with God, like he's been trying to do with these individuals. Now, what's so interesting about this story is that in verse 29, Yahweh's spirit does come upon Jephthah, and that to me just seems so bizarre, that this man is showing himself in no way, shape, or form to be a godly person, and yet God's spirit is still with him. And in this, in verse 30, Jephthah makes probably the most famous part of his story is this vow. He makes this vow to Yahweh: if in fact you hand over the Ammonites to me, whoever comes out of the doors of my house to greet me when I return safely from the Ammonites will belong to Yahweh, and I will offer that person as a burnt offering. Now, it could be whoever or whatever in verse 31. The Hebrew word there is ambiguous. It can mean either or. So it could mean an animal. It could also mean a person. But it very clearly says that this will be a burnt offering. And the word here that's used for burnt offering refers to nothing else other than a burnt offering. It is never referred to in a figurative way. Not at all. It's never referred to in a figurative way. I also want to note this, that God does not interact with Jephthah at this moment at all. He does not accept this offering or this vow, nothing whatsoever. So the verse 32, Jephthah crossed over to the Ammonites and to fight against them, and Yahweh handed them over to him. He defeated 20 of their cities with a great slaughter, from Aroer all the way to entrance of Meneth and to Abel Keramim. So the Ammonites were subdued before the Israelites. So he gets the victory. He gets what he was looking for. Again, he's a good soldier. He's a warlord. He can do this. But whenever he gets home, in verse 34, whenever the returning army would return back home, we've seen numerous times whenever there's deliverance or a victory that normally who meets them out are the women, are the first ones to meet them out with music and dancing and such. And that's exactly what happens here. It is Jephthah's daughter that meets him first. And instead of legitimate heartbreak for the situation for her, he focuses so much on himself. No, not my daughter. You have devastated me. You have brought great misery on me. He's focusing on himself, and he blames his daughter. Why did you come out to meet me? Well, it only makes sense to me that would happen. Again, we see in stories leading up to this point, the women, and afterwards, the women are often the ones that greet the soldiers as they come back. It's a moment of rejoicing, for they have been delivered. They have gained a victory. But Jephthah, again, very selfish, again, not in tune with the things of Yahweh at all. But his daughter says, you have given your word to Yahweh. Do to me as you have said, for Yahweh brought vengeance on your enemies, the Ammonites. She goes along with it. Some have indicated that this is a sign of faith on her part, because you made this vow, you have to keep this vow. Except for the fact, if they knew the Torah, if they knew the law, then they would know from places like Leviticus 27 or Numbers chapter 3 that they have the opportunity to rectify this poor vow with a monetary sacrifice, with a monetary donation. But they don't know that because they're not, or at least from Jephthah's perception, or from Jephthah's perspective, he's not a godly man. He doesn't know the law of Yahweh. He doesn't know that at all. So she asked to simply be able to go for 2 months through the mountains to mourn her virginity, which I really think has to do with the fact that she has no children. So often the lineage of individuals was their reputation. It was the way that they would be remembered. So she would have none. So that's a very sad and disgraceful thing on her part. And also for Jephthah, he has no other children. So this would be very, very, very disgraceful on his part. I think really at the end of the day, whenever we look at verses, whenever we finish out the text 38, 39, and 40, she comes back and he carries this out. I'm very much of the belief that he literally sacrificed his daughter. That's not a good thing. There's nothing about this that tells us this is something that Yahweh wanted or that Yahweh desired. But we have to remember, Israel's not in a good place right now. Like going back to what we talked about with the fatal funnel, whatever you want to call it, that is present here within the story of Judges. It just shows how Israel continues to grow worse and worse. Again, where are we at right now? We're down here with Jephthah and Ibzan, Elon and Abdon. Nothing here is good. There's nothing that is redeemable really about Israel at this time. So whereas we might want to try to read things with a lot of grace and charity, we also have to read them very honestly. And Israel's not in a good place, so I don't really have any reason to believe that we should be reading this in such a way that means anything other than what it says. Because again, the word that is used there for burnt offering never means anything else in Scripture. Somebody would say, well, I can't believe God would accept that. I don't think God is accepting that. I don't think God is accepting and approving of what he does here. But other gods, the gods of the Canaanites, they would accept that. So again, this is a sign to me that Jephthah here is thinking so much more like a Canaanite and a pagan than he is an Israelite. And that's to his discredit. That just shows that he's not being the type of man that he is, that he should be. Now, what makes this difficult, or before I say that, again, in not having any children, I think this is God's judgment upon Jephthah, that he's not going to be remembered through future generations of his children inheriting the land. And that, again, is a very disgraceful thing. What's difficult about this, even more so again, is the fact that Jephthah is mentioned in Hebrews 11. And we have to wrestle with that. We have to wrestle with the fact that there are times that there was something about his life in which it was commendated as being good. That there was something in Jephthah's life that would be seen as a feat of faith. So much so that he'd be listed in that text of Hebrews 11. But there's also other individuals like Samson, like Gideon, who we've already looked at, who, again, was not a good guy, had moments, but overall just didn't seem that great. Samson, for the most part, wasn't great, but his last moment was good in the fact that he took out his enemies, the Philistines. So again, I hope that just gives us something to think about, to maybe change the way we think about Hebrews 11 and to consider what exactly is in view there in that text. Are we looking at people who overall are seen as people of faith, or are we seeing just snapshots in their lives that show what faith can allow someone to do? Just something to think about. Jephthah's story ends, again, not well, in the fact that he's at war with his own people. He's at war with the Israelites, ends up killing 42,000 Israelites. Again, that's not good. Maybe he lied throughout the story as well. Verse number 2, my people had bitter conflict with the Ammonites, so I called for you. Because remember, Ephraim was mad that they didn't get called to war, which is the same thing that happened in chapter 8, verse 1 with Gideon. They're mad. They just want to fight, I guess. They weren't called. They were mad with Gideon. They weren't called again. They're mad with Jephthah. And Jephthah says, I called for you, but you didn't answer me. Is that true? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. It could have happened and not been recorded, or he could be lying. I just don't know. But remember that he's a shrewd negotiator. He's a shrewd negotiator. And eventually he ends up killing many of his countrymen, thousands of his countrymen. And that's just not good. And at the end, in verse number 7 of chapter 12, there's no rest for Israel that's mentioned, whereas that had happened in previous Judges stories. Then there's Ibzan, Elon, and Abdon that are mentioned. Ibzan seems to be growing his political influence by giving his children and taking from children in marriage from the other alliances. Again, we're seeing people kind of elevating themselves as kings throughout the land of Egypt. Not much about Elon. But again, more king language is found for Abdon in verses 13, 14, and 15, where his sons and grandsons rode on donkeys. Again, that's royal in nature. But in all this, there's no good details. There's not really bad details necessarily. There's not any good details. It's just blah. And that's really where Israel is right now. Israel's just blah. There's so much rejection of God, so much of becoming like the Canaanites, becoming like pagans, that we're just really left shaking our heads at the disappointing condition of the nation as a whole at this time. But again, what we see is that Judges riffs off of Joshua. We see a lot of conquest, a lot of success, Unfortunately, we see what happens whenever the Israelites don't follow through in obedience to Yahweh, that they end up getting themselves in trouble. And that's really what happens all throughout the Judges, is that as they don't obey God, as he is not their focus, as they are not loyal to the covenant, we just see negative story after negative story, have some moments of faith interspersed in there, but certainly not like we would hope to see. But the compilers of the Bible are going to help us out a bit as we read Ruth and see a good story there. So we have good story Joshua, really bad story Judges, but then we're going to get a little good at the end with Ruth here as we continue working our way through this text and considering these texts of the conquest here from Joshua to Ruth. If you have any questions about this text, I know we covered a lot of ground today. Please feel free to leave that in the comment section below. I'll be happy to try to answer or have a good discussion with you on those questions or comments. I thank you for giving some time to read along with me today. Hope you have a great rest of your Wednesday. Look forward to seeing everyone tonight as we gather together for our Bible studies at 7 p.m. Again, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow as we begin reading about Samson in Judges chapter 13. Take care. See you then. God bless.